Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Procrastinators Pit Stop. We have another amazing guest for you today, Henry Woodman. Henry is a visionary entrepreneur who founded Ice Portal, a leader in visual content management for the travel industry, later selling it to the Shiji Group. He is also an Emmy-nominated TV producer, co-founder of Anamoya Media, and is currently developing a TV series based on his father's historical fiction book, The Reincarnation of Marie. Henry, welcome to the show.
Oh, good. Chris, it's great to be here. And thanks for getting that Anamoya Media thing right, because most people will really look at that and go, huh, what? Never heard of the word. So appreciate it.
No problem at all. Appreciate you having you on the show, and we'll dig into that a little bit later because it's very interesting name. Might get the inspiration for that. Before we get into it, we do have an icebreaker on this show, and this was actually provided to us by our last guest. So you have lovely Marshall to thank for this lovely question for you.
Thanks, Marshall.
And it is, what keeps you up at night?
Oh, there's a lot of things that keep me up, but I think lately the thing that keeps me up most is the chasm in politics and our current world. The fact that we can't even keep truth to truth, and we don't even have agreements on basic things like climate change and election. I mean, I feel like, this is really ripping apart the fabric of the nation, and it concerns me for the next couple of generations if we don't figure it out.
Well, yeah, actually, that's a pretty good one to keep you up at night for sure.
Yep, that's a big one. Yeah,
That's a
it keeps a lot.
Yeah, the whole schism, it's between everybody. I mean, it's not just that. I could go on a whole hour about that, just how our society is technically designed to bring people together, but ironically, all it does is drive people up. And I'm talking about everything. It's not only politics, it's all the big things, right? Even sports. It's supposed to unite people, separates them, right?
Now it seems to be okay to act like a schmuck and degrade and demean people because, that's acceptable. What? When did that happen? Right? I'm like, geez, the world has gone ugly.
Just makes you understand the beauty more and appreciate the beauty more when you do.
Good point. I'm going to have to do that tonight when I go to sleep, and I won't lose sleep. Thanks.
So, Henry, why don't you give us a little bit about your background and sort of how you got to be where you are today?
Well, it's funny because I look back and I see a lot of dots connected, and I feel like the theme in my life has usually been as a hedonistic and opportunistic entrepreneur. And what I mean by that is I generally started out doing things that I wanted to do because they were self-serving, right? Something I enjoyed. And then as I continued going through my, paces, I would find myself seeing opportunities or stumbling into them and going, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to focus on doing that, or a solution to do that, which is really what got me here, because I just sold a tech company, and I tell you, I couldn't write a line of code if you put a gun in my head. I don't know technology, but I was at the right place at the right time, realizing there was a problem and figuring out how I can try to help clients to solve that problem. And so, I'll go back as simple as my days in college. I went to the University of Arizona in Tucson, and I'm sitting in a laundromat with a pocket full of quarters, and I'm jonesing for Pac-Man, right? The video game machine. And I thought, man, this place needs a Pac-Man. So instead of thinking, oh, somebody should do something, right? I went to my dorm room. I called every laundromat in Tucson, and I said, you want these video games? And they all said no. And I asked, would you like one? And, I'll share the revenue with you. And a couple said yes. So, of course, I had no money. So I took my tuition money and I went to an auction and I bought this used machine, because like these arcades in the malls would have machines that were never played. So they figured, screw it, it's just taking up space. They took them to the auctions and they'd sell them for less than what they paid for them just to get them off their books, right? And so I bought one of those because, hey, got a captive audience with a pocket full of quarters, and they would play it. And of course, then I'd buy another one, and then I'd buy another one, and I'd keep moving them around because they'd realize, man, what a piece of junk, right? And oh, thank God they updated it. Now there's a new one, right? So every month there'd be a new machine, and they eventually figured out. But that was my first sort of entree into taking advantage of an opportunity. But the sad part since I wanted to play the video games, I couldn't even go into the laundromats and play my own games because I would be taking quarters out of my pocket from people who wanted to play. Right. So I'm like, you know what? You play. No, you go ahead. Feed the damn machine. And so that was kind of where it started. Then I go to Los Angeles with my idea that I wanted to produce and direct movies. Right? Innocently thinking you just show up and, somebody will give you a movie or something. Right. And of course, that did not happen. I worked at Telemundo for a little while, editing TV. That's where I got the local area Emmys for a show I did. And then eventually I ended up working as a PA, a production assistant on travel films, right? And I would travel around the world and eventually, sound guy. And by the end of a couple of years, I'm a producer, right? And so I'm producing films, traveling around. And then the next opportunity presents itself, right? So Chile, which was a dictatorship with Pinochet, becomes a democracy, right? And as a result, they added new television stations and a new network. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, they need content, right? I'm going to go down there. We had a production company we used for our travel films, and I'm going to go down there and present myself as this American producer, right? And I ripped off an idea from a show in the US. I went down there, I packaged the whole thing, I pitched it, and we were on the air in a couple of months. So that was I'm going to go to Chile, produce a game show. And I did. And I thought, this is awesome, right? I could spend my life here. And then after about a year, the producers in the US had packaged a show and they did something similar in Spain. And then they put packages together and they would sell it to the network. And then they went, wait a second, you have a show just like this. Unless you get rid of that show, right? We're not going to sell you this package, which means my hit little show was taken off the air as a result. And they ended up going elsewhere. And I ended up moving back to the US. And if you want, I'll continue rambling on.
No, I mean that's it's a very interesting story, and thanks for sharing it. I mean, it sounds like you've had quite a mixed bag of experience. What would you say was your greatest challenge you've had to?
Well, early on, I think that I didn't think of anything as a challenge because I didn't have far to fall. You know what I mean? It's like I didn't have a house and a mortgage and a car and a family and kids and mouths to feed. I'm like, you know what? If I screw it up, what's the worst that can happen? I can go back and live with the parents or go live on somebody's sofa. No big deal, right? And then being nomadic and traveling, when I moved to Chile, I moved in and I shared an apartment with a guy who had another business. So it was great. So I didn't have a lot of those challenges because there wasn't a lot to lose. And if it didn't work out, I'd try something else, right? And so from my perspective, you really look for those opportunities and you try anything that is put in front of you or you make attempts. And eventually when you find something that you think you can do well, you have to say no to everything else, right? So you're a whore for nickels in the beginning and you say yes to everything. And then when you find something that you can win at, you try to scale and put a moat around it and say no to anything that's going to distract you from that growth.
That's very very interesting that you put that, because a lot of us we do get distracted. We get distracted by the big shiny or things that we should be doing, things that maybe we shouldn't be doing while we're trying to grow our business. So would you say that was maybe although I don't, from judging from your story, it doesn't sound like it, but did you
Yeah,
ever have any distractions at all that would take you off course completely?
yeah, I have distractions all the time, but yeah, the reality is that we all suffer. I used to joke that I have ADSO, and they're like, "Oh, what?" I said, "Yeah, I go to the doctor," and I said, "Look, I feel like I have ADD," and he runs some tests. I come back a week later, and he says, "I have good news and I have bad news." I'm like, okay, bring it on. What's the good news? He goes, "You don't have ADD," and I'm like, "Great. Well, what's the bad news?" And he goes, "You have ADSO." I'm like, okay, what's that? And he said, attention deficit, shiny object, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. So all of us have that attention deficit, shiny object, squirrel syndrome. And, when I left, when I was in Chile, actually, somebody gave me a CD-ROM and it had a virtual tour. So on the computer with my mouse, I could look up and down and all around. And I thought, this is the coolest thing ever, right? and I don't have to travel with 5 guys and 17 pieces of luggage to produce travel films. I could do all this myself. Oh yeah. So I started a company called World Travel Vision, which was one of the pioneers for virtual reality for travel. Eventually you realize that there isn't a huge barrier. It's a camera and a computer, and any kid is a competitor, right? Living at home. And you're like, and you have to travel and you have to maintain standards. And eventually some of the hotels that we were shooting in the Caribbean and in Mexico said, how do we put this virtual tour on this new World Wide Web thingy? I don't know, send them a CD-ROM. They said, yeah, we did. And there are no standards, right? So that was the pivot from producing virtual tours to then producing and distributing the virtual tours, right? That's sort of pivot one. And then while I'm sort of a loss leader on the production so that I can get the recurring revenue on the distribution, I then realized that it's nice to have virtual tours, but there was another problem. And that is that those systems that gave you the rate and the availability for a hotel, they didn't have pictures, right? Those predated the internet. So pictures were sent in a separate database and it was married together at the end on the website. So virtual tours are nice to have, photos are neat to have. So I slowly started to pivot again, and we set up the platform to create the management and the distribution of photos. And after 25 years, we were an overnight success after 25 years. So right now, if you go on any travel website on the planet, somebody's at the door. If you go on any travel website on the planet, you'll see pictures of hotels. They generally will have come from our server. So it's a tremendous moat because you can say, listen, that's a great idea. And you go to Wyndham, the largest hotel group, and you say, listen, I got this technology, it'll size, tag, categorize, it'll do everything but pick your nose. And Wyndham says, great. Can you send it to Expedia? And you go, well, I'm talking to them. All right, well, what about Booking and Despegar and Decolocar and C-Trip? And you're like, oh my God, that'll take me years. Yeah, good luck. When you get there, call me. Because you can't get a deal because there's a big chicken and egg scenario. So we slowly built it up over decades and then finally was able to sell it. But with a lot of bumps along the road and pain and, lawsuits and shit from our competitor.
No, I mean, that's great because, I mean, and it's good that you say overnight success in 25 years, because I know a lot of us do have this, I don't want to necessarily call it a sense of entitlement, but we're definitely sold a bill of goods and we can say, yeah, you can do anything. And yeah, you can do it overnight, but we're never told that overnight is, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 4 years, 25 years, So I'm glad that your story incorporates that, because it really shows how perseverance and consistence is.
Well, there are a lot of, listen, we go in as entrepreneurs, we go in with this sense of invincibility, like we are going to succeed because we're different, right? And the truth is, statistically, that the majority of those will fail, right? And so you don't go into it thinking, okay, yeah, the failure rate is 90%, and I'm not going to be one of those statistics. Go in believing, hey, I'm going to do it. And there were multiple times I came on the verge of failure, and there were, I didn't pay myself for years. I ended up I mortgaged my house, the line of credit to pay employees, and we were days away from bankruptcy, and somebody gave me a bailout. So we had lots of bumps along the road, but the truth of the matter is you don't know what you don't know until you jump right into it.
Mm. Which is very true. Actually, it leads me to my next question as well. How do you define procrastination, and what has it meant to you personally?
Yeah, procrastination really is the fear of failing or doing something that you might fail, so you just push it off, in my opinion. Like sales is a good example. I don't want to call those people because I fear I'm going to get rejected. I put it off, right? Or here's my to-do list. And these things, it's just laborious and tedious. And, I'll do it later because I want to do the things that I am excited about now, right? And I think that is probably the challenge and discipline to try to say, okay, keep planting seeds and grinding. Keep, I would say wash, rinse, repeat. Do it again. Wash, rinse, repeat. Not very exciting, but the fundamentals have to happen.
No, that's very good, and a lot of people don't as we learned in COVID, maybe it's too early for this joke. Wash, rinse, and repeat is something that is very necessary, right? But that goes in just going with it. So you never had any time where you were kind of just putting something off and you need to push right through it, or you never really had an issue with like the drive?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of times where I didn't really find myself going, I want to do this, but I'm going to put it off, except for what I'm doing now, right? 40 years ago, remember, I went to Los Angeles dreaming about, breaking into the television film business as a producer director. Well, that never happened, right? I mean, I did other things like editing and stuff, but travel films, but not what I was thinking. Now, 40 some odd years later, I'm developing a series for streaming on TV. So that was like a 4-decade putting off, putting it on the back burner, because I always knew I wanted to do it. The challenge is the entertainment industry, like anything, is a very, very difficult industry to make a lot of money to sustain life, right? I mean, as an actor or somebody in the business, you get a job. The job starts, beginnings, middle, and end, and it ends. And then you're like, okay, next. Then you got to find another job, right? In large part, same with producers. Executives at studios, it might be a little bit different, but for the most part, everything is somewhat cyclical. And, producers I've talked to are like, man, this is great. You built a tech company, sold it, and now you have money to survive and not have to stress. I wish I would have done that, And I think that's a challenge people getting into it, to realize, listen, I really need to pay the bills. I got to sell this. I'm not there, fortunately, so I can do it on my time. And, if it happens in a year or 5 years, it doesn't really matter, right? So that's the biggest procrastination. I wanted to produce this thing. Literally, I bought the rights to this book literally like 41 years ago, and here we are now talking.
Oh, they always say, better late than never, right?
Exactly.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned, we talked about barrier to entry and how people want to be a producer. If somebody wants to be a producer now, do you think the barrier has definitely lowered as compared to, say, 20 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, listen, I'm not deep into the industry by the stretch of anybody's imagination. So the reality is, years ago, there were a handful of studios that controlled pretty much the production and the distribution of film and TV content, right? As the streamers, then comes cable, right? Then the streamers come along, and now you have just oodles of content need and opportunity. Now, that's the good and the bad. The good is cameras are cheaper. If you're decent with lighting and sound, you can create something pretty good where you couldn't before. You can edit on a computer. You can do things that, decades ago were just unfathomable, right? But prices have gone down, the economies of scale. Like, listen, I can't afford to pay big budgets anymore. I'll buy something from Korea, or I'll use a European thing, or we'll shoot some low budget because there is an audience for that. So getting into it's good. Profitability, maybe not so much. Box office percentage, not as much as it once was. Production budgets and expenses in Hollywood are down by 40%. Unemployment is up like 12%, more than the national, which is like 4%. So it's tough times for Hollywood because the things I mentioned, and there's a big fear factor, which rightfully so, is called AI, right? That would scare the crap out of me if I were a writer or even a content producer, thinking, one full day of production gives me 2 minutes of finished film. Oh my God, right? So then you turn around and you say, this guy can create an entire film, text to video, in a matter of days? What? For a significant fraction of the cost? That is scary.
Mhm. And actually, you've hit the nail on the head too. I mean, AI is one of the big reasons that a lot of us are kind of pausing and not sure where to go. I mean, I'm procrastinating on writing a book right now because everybody's like, "You want to write a book?" I'm like, well, you know, if it's gonna get, and this is something that I have to work on too, because I mean, a lot of us say, well, we want to put it out there for the value, right? But then that's where everything else comes in. Well, wait a second. If my book is going to get the same level of reception as somebody who writes it using AI in like half the time, or maybe even a quarter of the time, what's the point, right? And that is something that we're going to have to get out of on a whole, because I don't know, but I don't think that we'll ever see AI completely take over creativity. It's still going to need some human creative to tell it what to do. Do you
I
think?
think creativity is in a fairly unique position. Like people that are on stage performers, I don't want to see a robot doing, aerial acts or something like that, right? But in things that it can speed up efficiencies, like for writing, you may be using your creative, but you'll probably use AI to say, you know what, spell check this and make sure I haven't had any syntax or shit that, I don't want to go and publish something like that. But the other problem is it can also turn crappy writers into good writers. One. Two, now there is an influx more of content, which means, it's what, 3.5 million books a year are being published. And like, all right, so how does the average person know my book exists unless, Oprah or Reese Witherspoon puts it on one of their top 10 lists? It's really hard to break through all that noise. And that's the scary part. The only ones making money are, the advertisers, the Googles and the Amazons of the world by taking their piece of the sale. So, it's the guys who are dreaming, be a publisher and I'm going to make it big. It's the 1% out there that's making all that money.
I would tend to agree with that, but now there is a rather, well, I wouldn't say it's a new movement, but people fail to realize the power of other people, right? So now you've got it sort of went this way, but it kind of didn't. So you were talking about the risk, you're talking about payoffs and things like that, which is one of the things I've noticed in Hollywood recently. I don't know if you've noticed, even 10 years ago, you'd have maybe 1, 2, 3 producers, and now you've got like 10, 10 or 15 producers on a single movie, and it's interesting because
Oh, yeah, yeah.
um,
You
yeah,
always ask, like, what do all these people, I mean, so there's usually one main producer, usually the showrunner, that is the guy who puts the nuts and bolts together. Then there are other people that put their names on there, usually executive producers. Like, I don't plan to produce, I plan to executive produce, which means they brought the property to the table, right? Or they brought money to the table, or they brought some sort of deal with them, or, they're owing somebody some. There's a variety of reasons. I would imagine that the ones that really matter are the ones that are in the day to day, the showrunners, if you will.
yeah. I was wondering about that for sure. But it goes to show you too. You were asking like, how do I get my book noticed amongst millions of other books? And the thing is that it's the power of other people, right? You need your networks. You got your network. If you've got a network, you've got everything. It's not even really about what you can do or how you can do it anymore. It's just, who do you know? It's to push it through,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And even then, when I talked to my publisher and I said, so how do we get awareness for this book? And, you go to a publicist, you can pay the publicist a boatload of money to try to get you out there on, you know, TV talk shows or on these lists or things like that. It's expensive, and even though I could afford it, I can't I can't rationalize it, that why would I spend, a significant amount of money for getting more people to read the book? Yeah, I want people to read the book because it's the platform for the series, right? The idea really is the series doesn't stand alone. The series comes from this concept of this reincarnation and, soulmate thing. So it's a really tough balancing act to try to get, awareness for the book, which ultimately, I'm not going to make money on the book. I know that, but is to use it as a platform for promoting the series.
So when you have this book, you have the rights to the book. You didn't. It's your father's book. So turning that into a mini series. What sort of challenges does that have?
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. It's so my father wrote this as a tribute to a friend over 40 years ago, right? And he was a travel writer and an archaeology guy in the travel business. He wasn't this mushy kind of love story kind of guy by the stretch of anybody's imagination. So when my sister reads this manuscript, because she was helping him move, she loved it. She calls me up. She goes, Daddy wrote this love story. I'm like, what? Dad, love story? This does not compute, right? So she sends it to me and I fell in love. I was in tears and I'm like, oh my God. So I buy the rights. I mean, I didn't have a lot of money, so I give him $1. I call a friend of mine who's producing a movie at the time. And I said, listen, I want you to read this. And he looks at me and goes, Henry, I'm in the middle of a movie. I don't have time for this. I'm like, no, take your time. It's just because of my dad wrote it and I want to know if it's any good. 3 days later, he calls me up. He goes, couldn't put it down. I love this. We are meant to do this, right? 4 years ago. So he ended up getting screwed with the distribution of his movie, went into real estate. I went in going to do game shows in Latin America. Next thing you know, I said, and we've stayed in touch. I said, when I sell my tech company, we're going to then develop this. Now, the book is very simple and linear about a guy who finds his soulmate only to know that she died 70 years earlier, right? And it's a simple linear story where he finds her reincarnation. In the series, we do a far deeper dive because now we're, multiple shows for a season where we tackle the lives of Marie. The protagonist in the story is Marie Bashkirtseff. She actually existed in the late 1800s. And she writes a journal between 14 and 24. She died at 24 of tuberculosis. 2 years after her death, she writes her journal is published and it becomes an international bestseller. And 70 years later, a guy reads it and falls in love with her. And in her journal, she says, I will find you in time. She believes reincarnation, you're out there, wait for me type thing. And he believes she's writing to him, right? So what we do in the series, it's now the working title is called Slippin', like slipping through time. It's actually going into the lives of Marie and the people in her world and how they intersect with the current protagonist's life, his name is Jonathan, in the future. When we talk about sins of the father and karma and soulmates, do they exist? And what does that mean? And do we see our soulmate in every life? Or does it mean that, we have shit to work out from stuff we didn't resolve last time? So we explore all of these questions. We don't obviously answer because who the hell knows the answer, but it touches upon those subjects of, wow, does this exist? I mean, why are we really here? Do soulmates exist? Karma, I met you somewhere, or, it's funny because I had lunch with a friend and he says, yeah, I married my soulmate, but we realized we had shit to figure out. So we're going to divorce and then try it again in another life. And I'm like, what? Like mind blown, right? Seriously? Wow. So who knows? There's an audience for it.
No, for sure. And it sounds like it's going to be a really interesting show for sure. You've got you've got all these big plans. Where do you see yourself in the next year?
Accepting an award. Yeah. Oh, in the next year? Oh, yeah. That's a tough one, because we haven't sold anything. We're in the process of we just put together what's called the pitch deck. So we were now looking at a list of showrunners that we believe would be the ones to bring this to life, meaning they've done something similar in the past and they would be good and they have relations with streamers and studios, right? So a year from now, we'll have a production deal in play and it'd be in what's called pre-production. So you do a little pre-production and then you go into production and then you do post-production.
So when you actually get to production, how long will it take you to produce the show, the first season?
Probably 2 to 3 months, depending on, which locations we are. I'm looking at probably in the Czech Republic because a lot of this takes place in Paris and there's a lot of inexpensive production capabilities in the Czech Republic. And there are a lot of older buildings that can easily look like Paris in the 1800s, late 1800s.
Well, I mean, I know I, for one, am looking forward to checking that out when it becomes available. So don't procrastinate on that.
That makes 2 of us, baby. Yeah, I've been procrastinating 40 years. What's another year or 2?
For you, but hey, now you got me invested in this. Now I want to see it.
Yeah.
So I know we're coming up pretty close on time here. Do you think there was anything that I didn't ask that I should have asked today, or anything that you feel we should have covered that we didn't cover today?
Well, obviously the challenges, but I want to say for those and for those who say, well, where do I find this book or where do I find information on how that's progressing? I created a website called mariethestory.com, and it contains information about the book and my father, who is the writer, and the show Slippin', and some links on me and my LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, in case anybody wants to see what happens in a year or two, right? But I think, from a business and procrastination perspective, what happened when I started my business is my real business. The others were sort of beginning, middle, and end. Productions don't always have an ongoing concern. But when I had the tech business and I realized I really need to know how to run a business, right? People would ask me, they'd say, you got to hire the best people. I can't even afford to pay myself. I can't afford best. I don't even know what that means, right? Or you need to get the culture. I'm like, well, what's that? Or you got to have KPIs. I'm like, I don't know what a KPI is, right? So I went back to school and got my MBA in entrepreneurship in my 50s as I was starting the business, to understand how to build proper foundation that I can scale quickly and easily, right? And so that, and a book that I picked up called Traction by Gino Wickman, which brought a lot essentially to light. The light bulb went off. I'm like, oh, so that's what that means. Oh, so that's how to accomplish those things. And so I think the challenge really is to learn what you need to do and not always put out fires. That's probably the best advice I could give is I tell people, for example, the difference between drowning and treading water is not very significant, right? But when you're drowning and you're flailing your arms around and you're mentally and physically exhausting yourself, you think you're going to die, right? And to say, well, listen, watch this video on YouTube on how to tread water, and I'm going to throw you in the deep end. You'll be fine. Nah, bullshit. You're going to take time to learn how to move with the hands to feel the water and calm your mind, and you're okay. It doesn't happen right away, right? And it's the same thing in the business. You need to learn how to assemble those parts, how to create that vision, what that means, and how to get the hell out of the way to let the smarter people than me, at least, do what needs to happen.
All right, got some very good advice there. Don't worry, to our users, we are going to put that website in the show notes, so you won't have to go digging for it. And just wanted to say again, thank you so much for being on the show today, Henry. And
Thank you.
thank you so much to our listeners for tuning in. And just remember, if you can't find that motivation or inspiration for yourself today, maybe just go out and be that motivation or inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.
Thanks, Chris.